Caleb Mercer first saw the figure in the window across from his when it bent its neck too far to be human and kept staring long after the lights went out. It started the night the old man next door passed away. His house had always been silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like it had been there for years. I used to pass his door every day on my way home, and I never once heard music, a television, or even a conversation. The blinds on his windows were always drawn tight, yellowed with age. And I never saw him outside except for the rare moments he stood in the hallway fumbling with his keys. He always kept his head down. I never even knew his name. The night they took him away was unusually cold. I heard the low murmur of voices through my own walls, the thud of boots on the stairs, and the distant hum of an ambulance idling on the street below. I looked through my peephole and saw 2 paramedics wheeling out a black body bag. For some reason, I couldn't look away. The zipper glistened under the fluorescent hallway lights, and the bag sagged in the middle like it was cradling something frail. As they passed, the smell of antiseptic and something faintly metallic seeped into my apartment. When I finally turned toward my bedroom that night, I noticed his second-floor window, the one directly facing mine, was wide open for the first time. The blinds had been pushed aside, and a thin curtain fluttered in the breeze. The house seemed different, almost alive, like it had been holding its breath for years and was now finally letting the air in. I stood at my own window, watching the curtain ripple in and out. The streetlight outside threw a pale glow into the empty room beyond, revealing nothing but bare walls and a shadow pooling in the corner. For weeks afterward, the place stayed untouched. No lights, no movement. Dust seemed to collect on the windowsill, and the curtain hung still again. I thought maybe the property would stay abandoned for months, maybe even years. Then, one morning, I woke to the sound of a heavy truck outside. When I pulled my blinds back, a black moving truck was parked across the street. Its back doors were wide open, revealing stacks of cardboard boxes, but there were no movers in sight. I watched for nearly an hour waiting to see someone carrying things inside, but the street stayed strangely empty. Every so often a box would be gone when I looked again, but I never saw the process happen. By the afternoon, the truck was gone, and the blinds on my neighbor's window were drawn shut again, just like the old man's had been. That night, I stayed up late scrolling on my phone. The room was dark except for the dim blue light of the screen. Sometime after midnight, I looked toward the window across. The blinds there were no longer closed. A soft, dim yellow light glowed from within, but it didn't illuminate the whole room. It left most of it swallowed in shadow. I leaned forward to see better, and that's when I noticed a figure, standing still, just inside the glass. Its body was partly hidden in darkness, but the head and shoulders were visible enough to make my chest tighten. Whoever it was wasn't moving. They weren't doing anything at all, just staring. I couldn't tell if they were looking directly at me or through me, but there was a stillness to them that made my skin prickle. There was something wrong about the way they stood. Not the casual stillness of someone lost in thought, but a posture that felt unnatural, tilted slightly to one side, like their spine had been bent in an odd direction and then frozen there. Their arms hung stiff at their sides. The longer I stared, the more uneasy I felt. The thought of them seeing me this clearly made my chest feel tight. I reached for the lamp on my desk and turned it off, plunging my apartment into darkness. I thought if I couldn't see them anymore, maybe they couldn't see me. But even in the shadows of my own room, I had the heavy, suffocating sense that they were still watching. I tried to brush it off. New neighbors can be strange. Maybe they were curious. Maybe they were just looking out the window at the night. I told myself it didn't matter. I got up to close my blinds completely, and as I reached for the cord, my eyes flicked toward the glass one last time. That's when I saw it. A fresh handprint smeared across the inside of my own window. The shape of the fingers was clear, the skin ridged and damp like it had just been pressed there. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't opened my window in weeks. No one had been in my apartment, yet the print was there perfectly formed, like someone had been standing exactly where I was now, only on the other side of the glass. For the next few days, I kept my blinds shut tight. I didn't dare glance toward the window across from mine, not even in daylight. Something about that handprint on the glass gnawed at me. I had wiped it away almost immediately, but as I did, I noticed the faint outline of moisture still clinging to the pane, like it had seeped into the glass itself. The air in my apartment felt heavier after that night, as if the walls were holding something in. I might have been able to push it to the back of my mind if it weren't for the smell. It began subtly, a faint sour odor that seemed to come from somewhere in the hallway outside my door. I thought maybe someone had left garbage out too long, but each day it grew worse. It wasn't the ordinary kind of rot you'd get from spoiled food. It was thicker, sharper. There was a chemical sting to it, like something had been soaked in cleaning fluid to hide the real scent underneath. But it didn't work. The smell pushed past whatever had tried to mask it, and it was sickly sweet in a way that made my stomach knot. Every time I stepped out into the hallway, it hit me harder, and it always came from the same place right outside my neighbor's door. The black paint on the door was chipped in spots, the handle scuffed from years of use. I stared at it once, trying to work up the nerve to knock, but my skin prickled just standing that close. I wasn't even sure who would answer. One afternoon, I saw the landlord in the hallway, muttering about the smell. He knocked on the neighbor's door 3 times, waited, then frowned when no one responded. He lingered there for a moment, sniffing the air, before shrugging and walking away. The moment he was gone, the silence in the hallway seemed to deepen. That night, I lay in bed with the television on low, trying to drown out my thoughts. I woke suddenly around 3 in the morning, my chest tight. The smell was in my apartment now so strong I could almost taste it. It was like breathing in spoiled air from somewhere deep underground. My eyes watered as I stumbled toward the front door, half expecting to see it hanging open. But when I stepped into the hallway, the air outside was clean. The smell was gone completely, as if it had never been there. I shut the door and turned back toward my bedroom, trying to calm my racing heart. That's when I noticed it. My bedroom window was open, not wide, just a few inches. Enough to let in the cool night air. I never left it open. A thin layer of dust had been disturbed on the sill, and something caught my eyeprints. Tiny, distinct, and scattered across the surface. Not handprints this time. Footprints. Bare, muddy ones, no longer than the palm of my hand. They started at the window and trailed in a loose pattern toward the middle of the floor before vanishing completely, as if whoever or whatever had made them had simply stopped existing in the middle of the room. I stared at them for what felt like forever. The mud was fresh, still damp enough to stain my fingertips when I touched it. My thoughts raced in circles. They weren't from an animal, the shape was wrong. The toes were long and narrow, almost human, but the arch was unnaturally high, and the stride was too short, like whoever had made them moved differently than a person should. I locked the window, wiped the prints away, and told myself I would buy a camera in the morning. Something to reassure me that nothing strange was happening, that there was a reasonable explanation. But the thought of sleeping again with that open window still fresh in my mind made my skin crawl. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every sound magnified in the darkness. I swore I could hear faint creaks in the floorboards, but every time I held my breath to listen, they stopped. The air felt colder around my bed, like something unseen was leaning in close, studying me. I pulled the blanket over my head and tried not to think about the footprints, or the smell, or the handprint on my window. But sleep never came. All I could do was lie there, listening to my own heartbeat, waiting for a sound I knew I wouldn't be able to explain. Sleep became almost impossible. Even on nights when the smell didn't return, there was something else, something that kept my body tense and my ears alert long after midnight. It began with soft tapping against the wall I shared with a neighbor. At first I convinced myself it was just the old building settling or maybe pipes knocking inside the walls, but the taps were too precise, too rhythmic. The pattern wasn't random. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, pause, then 5, the same sequence, over and over. It didn't matter if I turned up the television or buried my head under a pillow, the sound still found its way into my head, drilling there until I was counting the knocks in the dark without meaning to. One night, frustration got the better of me. I pressed my ear to the wall, determined to hear something more, some clue about what was causing it. For a long moment there was only silence, and I began to feel foolish. Then, so close to my ear I could almost feel it, came the sound of breathing. It wasn't the steady kind. It was ragged, uneven, each inhale catching like it hurt. Whoever was on the other side was struggling. The breaths were slow, too slow, as though they were trying to control them, to listen at the same time I was. Then came something worse, a low murmur, deep in the throat, not forming any words, just a noise that made me think of someone trying to remember how to speak after years of silence. The sound rose and fell, almost like a chant, but broken and strained. I staggered back from the wall, my skin crawling. I turned on every light in the apartment, pacing from room to room just to hear my own footsteps over the quiet. But no matter how bright the lights were, the shadows seemed to cling to the corners, thicker than they should have been. I told myself I wouldn't listen again. I didn't want to hear more. But the next night, I woke to something different. Not knocking, not breathing, but a slow, deliberate, dragging sound, like fingernails trailing along the paint. The scrape moved upward, then stopped, then began again. It was so close it made the wall feel thinner somehow, as if it could crumble if I pressed too hard against it. I was sitting up in bed, debating whether to leave the apartment entirely, when I noticed a darker patch near the crack under my front door. It wasn't the normal shadow from the hallway light, it was thicker, more solid. Something was standing there, blocking the light completely. My throat tightened as I stared at it. It didn't move for a long time. The silence was absolute. Then, without warning, the shadow shifted. Not walking away, not stepping back, just lowering, as though whatever it was had crouched down to the floor, lining itself up with the space beneath the door. I could feel it now, a faint, cool draft seeping into the apartment. The air smelled faintly of the hallway, but also of something damp and stale, like a basement that had been closed for decades. I crept forward, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, and pressed my eye to the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty. Too empty. The kind of emptiness that makes you doubt it had ever been there at all. Relieved but shaken, I stepped back. That's when I saw it. A handprint smeared across the peephole's glass. It was perfect, detailed, every ridge of skin visible. But the thing that stopped me cold was its position. The print wasn't on the hallway side. It was on mine inside my apartment. I stared at it, my body locked in place, the truth settling in slow and heavy. Whatever had been standing there hadn't been outside my door at all. It had been inside, and it had been watching me through the peephole from the wrong side. I decided I couldn't take another night of it. I'd been telling myself I could ignore it, that maybe it was all in my head, but the truth was gnawing at me. Something was wrong in that apartment next to mine, and if I didn't face it now, I was going to lose my mind. The hallway was silent when I stepped out. My bare feet made no sound against the worn carpet, but every step felt heavier than it should. The air was colder than usual, carrying that faint chemical rot smell again, just enough to make the back of my throat tighten. I stopped in front of my neighbor's door. For a moment, I thought I saw it shift, as if someone inside had moved closer when they heard me. My hand hesitated over the wood. I wanted to knock, to demand answers, but my chest felt tight. The smell was stronger here, so thick it made me swallow hard just to keep from gagging. Then I saw if the door wasn't shut all the way. Just a sliver of black space between the door and the frame. It had never been left open before. A low draft spilled out from the gap, brushing my skin with a strange dampness. As if the air inside the apartment was heavier, thicker, I pushed the door slowly. It creaked as it moved, opening wider to reveal nothing but darkness. The place was empty. Not empty like someone had just moved in, but empty like no one had lived there in years. Bare walls, no furniture, no boxes, no signs of life. The floor was covered in irregular black stains, some small, some as wide as my palm. Like a mixture of mold and burned ash had been ground into the wood. The walls had deep scratches in them, long and uneven, some high up near the ceiling, others low to the floor. In one corner, I saw something else, a hole in the wall. Not a crack, not a gap for wires or pipes, but a wide, jagged opening. It was just large enough for a person to crawl through. The edges of the plaster were crumbling, the inside swallowed by a darkness that seemed to absorb the light from the hallway. I couldn't see what was beyond it, and I didn't want to know. The air coming from the hole was even colder, with that same damp chemical rot, but stronger, like it had been trapped deep inside whatever was back there. My skin prickled as I stepped backward, away from the hole, away from the room. I turned to leave, but as I reached the doorway, I froze. From down the hall, I heard the slam of my own apartment door. I broke into a run, my pulse hammering in my ears. I burst into my apartment, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. Everything had been moved, not stolen, moved. My couch was angled toward the window, my table pushed to the far wall, chairs turned to face corners. The rug in the living room was rolled halfway up, revealing deep scratches gouged into the floor beneath it. My blinds were gone, all of them. The windows were bare, exposing me to the outside night. My reflection stared back faintly in the glass, but in the dim light it almost looked like there was another shape behind me. The smell here was overpowering, thicker than it had ever been in the hallway. Then I noticed the floor. Muddy, barefoot prints trailed from the front door toward my bedroom. They were small, the same size as the ones I had found on my windowsill, but this time there were more of them, dozens. They overlapped, circled, wandered, like whoever made them had been pacing inside for a long time. The prints stopped at my bedroom door. My heart thudded in my throat as I pushed it open. The footprints continued inside, leading straight to my closet. The door was open just an inch, enough for a shadow to leak through the gap. I stepped closer, barely breathing, and reached out. When I pulled the door open, something crouched inside, shifted in the dark. Pale skin stretched over a thin, trembling frame. Arms too long for the body. Hollow eyes sunken deep into a face that looked like it hadn't seen light in years. It was wearing my clothes. I don't remember screaming. I don't even remember backing away. My mind goes blank when I try to think about those seconds in the bedroom. One moment I was staring into that closet, into that face wearing my shirt, and the next I was somewhere else entirely. A hallway. Sterile white walls. The hum of fluorescent lights above me. My body felt heavy, as though I'd been dragged here rather than walked on my own. They told me I'd had some kind of breakdown, that a neighbor had called the police after hearing me thrashing around in my apartment. I don't remember anyone calling. I don't remember them coming in. They said my front door was locked from the inside, and the place was untouched, no footprints, no smell, no sign of anyone else there. They told me there was no tenant living next door. Not now, not for the past year. The old man who had died had no relatives, no buyers. The apartment was sealed and unoccupied. They spoke with that tone people use when they think you're unwell. Calm, careful, every word shaped to avoid provoking you. I kept telling them about the handprints, the smell, the sounds in the walls, the footprints leading to my bedroom closet. But each time they only nodded and scribbled something down on their clipboards. The days blurred together. I was kept in a small hospital room with a bed, a chair, and a single window. The glass was thick, reinforced, but it let in enough daylight to make the place bearable. At night, the darkness outside pressed against it like a weight. I began to feel that same tension I'd felt in my apartment, as if someone was on the other side watching me. The first night I ignored it. The second night, I told myself it was nothing but paranoia. But by the third night, I couldn't pretend anymore. I noticed it some time after midnight, a light in the distance, faint but visible through the glass. The window across from mine was lit. It was at the same height, facing directly toward me. At first I thought it might just be another hospital room. But then a figure appeared, a silhouette, motionless, standing in exactly the same way as that night weeks ago, tilted to one side, arms hanging stiffly. Watching, I sat up in bed, my pulse quickening. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the heating system. My eyes burned from staring too long, but I couldn't look away. I called for a nurse, my voice hoarse. When she entered, I pointed to the window. I told her someone was standing there staring at me. She frowned, walked to my side, and glanced outside. Then she turned back with a puzzled look. "There's no window there," she said. I wanted to argue, but the words caught in my throat. She left the room, her shoes squeaking softly against the floor, and I was alone again. The figure was still there, still watching. It didn't move for hours. I thought maybe it was just an illusion, some trick of light. But as the night deepened, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The glass in that other window began to bend inward, like pressure was building from the inside. Thin cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, each one glinting faintly in the dim light. I pressed myself against the far wall, unable to look away. The cracks spread faster, pieces of glass trembling in their frame. I could almost hear the faint pop of the pane as the first shard loosened. The sound filled the room, then not knocking, not scraping, but the same uneven breathing I had heard through my apartment wall. It came from somewhere close, too close, as though the glass between us was already gone. The cracks in the window deepened, the center bowing outward. Something pale shifted behind the fractured glass.